At exactly 03:47 hours on May 12, 2026, a Ukrainian FPV drone operator crouched in a field 2 kilometers from the Russian border and watched his screen. Over 1,500 kilometers away, deeper inside Russian territory than any Ukrainian strike had ever reached, 9 Shahed-class drones were carving through the pre-dawn darkness over the Orenburg region, home to one of the world's largest natural gas fields, the economic backbone of Russia's war machine. The strike was not random. It was a message. 48 hours earlier, Vladimir Putin had stood before the cameras and unveiled what he called the most powerful nuclear missile on Earth, a new intercontinental ballistic missile capable, he claimed, of penetrating every existing and future anti-missile defense system on the planet, a weapon capable of traveling over 35,000 kilometers, a weapon that would be deployed before the year was out, and simultaneously, 2,200 kilometers to the south, in the muggy military corridors of Rawalpindi, Pakistan, a general stepped to a podium and told his nation that during last year's 4-day aerial war with India, Pakistan had shown New Delhi only 10% of its military potential. 2 nuclear standoffs, 1 week, and a fragile 3-day ceasefire that collapsed in hours before it even began. If you think we are watching the slow fade of multiple regional wars, you are dangerously wrong. What unfolded between May 8th and May 15th, 2026 is not a drawdown. It is the opening calibration of a new strategic era, and the moves made this week by Moscow, Kyiv, New Delhi, and Islamabad will echo for decades. Stay locked in until the final minute, because the most terrifying development of this week is not the missile, it is not the drone strike, it is what both of those events reveal about where we are heading next. Let's establish the battlefield picture first. The Institute for the Study of Wars data for the week of May 5th through 12th shows Russian forces suffered a net loss of 12 square miles of Ukrainian territory, the second consecutive week of Russian territorial regression after months of grinding advances. This follows a 21 square mile loss in the prior week. In the 4-week block running April 14th through May 12th, Russian forces hemorrhaged a net 45 square miles of Ukrainian land. That is roughly twice the size of Manhattan Island, reversed in a single month. But those numbers only tell half the story, because April 2026 also marked the single highest monthly drone deployment by Russia since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. Over 8,000 Russian drones were launched in April alone, according to data tracked by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. 8,000 in 1 month, against Ukrainian energy infrastructure, apartment complexes, kindergartens, civilian trains. On the night of May 11th into the 12th, Russia executed one of its heaviest combined drone salvos of the year. Over 200 drones screaming across 6 Ukrainian regions simultaneously. Kyiv's air defense intercepted the majority, but fragments detonated across energy facilities and apartment buildings. A kindergarten was hit. A civilian train was struck. 6 people died. Zelensky came on camera. His voice was flat, controlled. The kind of control you only achieve after 4 years of this. He had a single message for Moscow. Ukraine has said that we will act symmetrically in response to Russia. Within hours, Ukrainian drones were airborne, not over Belgorod, not over Bryansk, over Orenburg, 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, deep into Russia's resource heartland. A strike of such range that Russian Governor Evgeny Solntsev scrambled to claim 9 drones were repelled over his region. Fragments from downed drones still damaged a school, a kindergarten, a residential building. The irony was not lost on anyone. Ukraine had just demonstrated, in real time, that it can reach targets inside Russia that were previously considered untouchable. The strategic calculus for Russian military planners just shifted again. Now here is where the psychological warfare inside this conflict becomes truly extraordinary. On Friday, May 9th, Russia's Victory Day, Vladimir Putin appeared at a parade in Moscow. It was, by all accounts, the most scaled-back Victory Day ceremony in years. The parade that typically roars through Red Square with columns of armor and precision flyovers was muted, restrained. And yet, North Korean troops marched alongside Russian forces for the first time, a tribute to Pyongyang soldiers who fought to repel the Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk region. At the parade, Putin praised his forces, called the war a just cause, and declared that victory has always been and will be ours. Then, within hours, he told reporters that Russia's war on Ukraine was coming to an end and expressed willingness to meet Zelensky in a third country. Donald Trump, who had been pushing for a ceasefire, announced that Russia and Ukraine had agreed to a 3-day halt to all kinetic activity, running Saturday through Monday, with an exchange of 1,000 prisoners from each side. The ceasefire lasted approximately 0 hours. Both sides traded blame. Ukrainian drones continued flying. Russian artillery continued firing along the line of contact in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. The prisoner exchange did proceed, a rare thread of functional diplomacy in a conflict that has otherwise calcified into attrition. But here is what Moscow's softened tone this week actually signals. Putin's top commanders have reportedly convinced him that Russian forces can seize the whole of the Donbass by this fall. The Financial Times, citing 2 sources with direct contact with Putin, reported that Kremlin military planners believe a decisive regional victory is within reach before winter. That is not the posture of a leadership seeking peace. That is the posture of a leadership seeking to negotiate from a position of victory. The ceasefire offer is not diplomacy. It is a pressure valve, a way to test Trump's patience, absorb diplomatic credit, and slow the flow of Western aid, while Russian forces consolidate their positions on a line of fortress cities in eastern Ukraine. Zelensky read it instantly. His response was clinical. Russia has no intention of ending this war, and we are, unfortunately, preparing for new attacks. He was right. By Tuesday, May 13th, Russian drone sorties resumed at full operational tempo. Now we get to the centerpiece of this week's escalatory ladder. On Tuesday, May 13th, Russia conducted a test launch of what Putin described as the world's most powerful nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile. In televised comments, Putin was specific. The weapon can travel over 35,000 kilometers. It is designed to penetrate all existing and future anti-missile defense systems. Deployment is scheduled before the end of 2026. Defense analysts were, predictably, skeptical of Putin's claims. He has a documented history of inflating the capability profiles of Russian weapon systems. The Kinzhal hypersonic missile, for example, was marketed as unstoppable, and Ukrainian Patriot batteries began intercepting it in 2023. But the intent of this announcement matters more than the accuracy of its technical specifications. Russia fired this missile and announced it publicly. In the same week, it was engaged in ceasefire theater, prisoner exchanges, and diplomatic signaling. That is not a contradiction. That is a deliberate, multi-layered message. The message to Washington: we are still a nuclear peer. Any pressure you place on Russia has a ceiling defined by our deterrent capability. The message to Kyiv: whatever territory you recover, whatever strikes you execute, the ultimate escalation ladder terminates in our favor. The message to Beijing and Pyongyang: our alliance architecture is backed by the most advanced strategic weapons on Earth. And the message to every NATO defense planner staying late in Brussels this week: the ceiling you thought existed for this conflict is not where you placed it. At the same time, radar operators at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, were logging the launch data, feeding telemetry into classification systems, and updating kill chain models for the next generation of U.S. strategic missile defense upgrades. Because that is what NORAD does every time Russia tests. It turns their provocation into an American intelligence windfall. Putin launched a missile to project strength. The Pentagon recorded every data point of that launch to use against it. Now we pivot to the second theater that defined this week. And this one carries a different kind of weight. On May 7th, 2026, exactly 1 year after India launched Operation Sindoor, its multi-site precision strike campaign against 9 targets inside Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, Pakistani military spokesman Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry stood before cameras in Rawalpindi. Behind him, a presentation scrolled through a cascade of new weapons systems: supersonic cruise missiles, turbojet-powered loitering munitions, reconnaissance satellites, the formal operational debut of the Army Rocket Force Command, Pakistan's first dedicated precision strike missile force, modeled on the organizational structure of China's People's Liberation Army Rocket Force. And then he delivered the line that sent Indian military planners back to their targeting databases. Pakistan showed India only 10% of its military potential. What he was referring to was the 4-day aerial war of May 2025, a conflict triggered by a terrorist attack that killed 26 Hindu tourists in Kashmir, which India attributed to Pakistan-backed militants. India struck. Pakistan struck back. Both sides deployed fighter jets, BrahMos supersonic missiles, Fateh series artillery rockets, and hundreds of drones. The Pakistan Air Force's J-10CE fighters, supplied by China, reportedly downed Indian aircraft in aerial engagements. India's BrahMos strikes hit Pakistani air bases with precision, but exposed gaps in Pakistani ground-based air defense when the Chinese-supplied HQ-9B surface-to-air missile system failed to intercept incoming missiles. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides were wrong. The Washington Post's post-conflict analysis called the outcome little more than a draw. But a draw between two nuclear-armed nations over a disputed region is not stability. It is a starting pistol. This week, Pakistan's military unveiled the Fateh-3, a ramjet-powered supersonic cruise missile. It unveiled new jet-powered one-way attack drones. It confirmed the expansion of its J-10CE and JF-17 Thunder fleet. And Lieutenant General Chaudhry's statement, 10%, was aimed directly at Indian Army Chief General Upendra Dwivedi, who had this week publicly warned that Indian forces would not show any restraint this time in a future confrontation. The Pakistani military's response was immediate and volcanic. In a statement that should be read with extreme care, Pakistan's Inter-Services Public Relations Directorate warned that a future conflict might lead to cataclysmic devastation and that Pakistan would respond without any qualms or restraint. Two nuclear-armed militaries, both publicly threatening each other, both reloading, both with domestic political incentives to project dominance, both with weapons systems more capable than they were 12 months ago. The International Crisis Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, and ACLED all list a renewed India-Pakistan confrontation as a moderate to high probability contingency for 2026. The structural conditions that produced last year's four-day war, mutual distrust, the suspended Indus Waters Treaty, Pakistan-based militant networks, and India's evolving doctrine that treats major attacks as acts of war have not been resolved. They have been reinforced. The kindling is drier than it was a year ago, and both sides brought more matches. Let's zoom out. In a single week, the following happened simultaneously on the global military chessboard. Russia launched its most powerful nuclear missile on record. Ukraine executed its deepest ever strike into Russian territory. A ceasefire collapsed within hours of being announced. Russia lost 12 more square miles of Ukrainian territory while launching 200-plus drones in a single night. Putin hinted at peace while his generals planned for a Donbas seizure by fall. India and Pakistan traded their most aggressive mutual warnings since last year's shooting war. Pakistan unveiled new weapon systems and declared it had only shown India 10% of its capability. This is not the world winding down toward resolution. This is the world calibrating for the next round. Here is the most dangerous single data point from this week that almost no one is discussing. Russia's average monthly territorial gain in Ukraine over the past 12 months has been 143 square miles. That is a slow, grinding, expensive advance, bought in blood and steel and winter and drones. But Russian military planners, according to the Financial Times sourcing, believe they can accelerate that pace dramatically enough to seize the Donbas by autumn. If that intelligence assessment is accurate, if Russian forces genuinely believe they have a seasonal window to achieve a decisive conventional victory, then the ceasefire diplomacy, the prisoner exchanges, the soft language from Putin about peace talks are not signals of war weariness. They are cover fire. They are the diplomatic equivalent of a smokescreen deployed to slow Western weapons deliveries, fracture European support coalitions, and buy Russian logistics the time to reposition for a summer offensive, while Trump navigates his China trip, while India and Pakistan consume Western diplomatic bandwidth in South Asia, while the world watches two crises instead of one. The move that wins in this kind of multi-theater strategic environment is the move no one sees coming, and this week, we may have just watched it begin. The world was not closer to peace this week. It was closer to a convergence of crises that the international system is not designed to manage simultaneously. A Russia-Ukraine war approaching a potential inflection point, either toward a frozen ceasefire or a Russian offensive push, while Moscow waves a nuclear ICBM at the Western alliance. A South Asian powder keg where two nuclear-armed nations are actively rearming, threatening each other publicly, and operating under doctrines that could trigger a conflict from a single terrorist incident. And underneath all of it, the slow, quiet work of drone engineers, missile scientists, electronic warfare specialists, and AI-driven targeting systems that are making every future conflict faster, more lethal, and harder to stop once it starts. The question is not whether the next trigger will be pulled. The question is who pulls it first, in which theater, and whether the response ladders stay below the nuclear threshold. In both Europe and South Asia this week, the answer to that last question is less certain than it was 7 days ago. What do you think? Is Putin's peace signaling genuine exhaustion or strategic camouflage? And after Pakistan's 10% warning to India, how close are we to round 2 in South Asia? Drop your assessment in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want the classified breakdown, because the next development in both theaters is already moving, and you do not want to be behind the curve when it lands. Stay sharp, stay informed. The board is set.